and start out by stating your name and what your rank was in the Air Force.
Oh, name was Richard G. Hetzel. Rank at that point was lieutenant.
So you have this weird situation in which nobody seems to know what is the object, right? In previous wars, like World War II, the idea is, okay, we need to capture this land. We need to get this land back, and when we get to Berlin, then the war's going to be over. In Vietnam isn't like that, right? Because so much of the fighting is going back and forth. They might take a hill, right? We have to take this hill, and then the next week they'll say, oh, okay, well, it doesn't matter. It's not that important. And what it ends up being then is it turns into a war of attrition, all right? And a war of attrition is just who can kill more people.
I don't think they had their own idea of what the end goal was. I think it was one of these, well, go over there and because one of the things that happens, and we've seen it happen on the last go around here, is it depends upon what you get supplied as to what your limitations are.
You start seeing an escalation of troops, and it becomes this situation in which what is the point, right? What are they trying to accomplish? What do we want to do? The North Vietnamese are not going to stop. North Vietnamese had been fighting for years. They weren't going to stop.
It took I came back through the West Coast, okay? I was wearing my camouflage jungle fatigues, canvas boots, and wind up at the airport. I guess it was San Francisco, and they closed the door on the airplane. Well, this was before they had the guards standing there. So at this point, my sense of humor was less than appropriate, and I went out there and banged on the side of the bird. And they finally let me in, and so then I flew back to New Orleans, and all was cool. But, you know, it was interesting. For the most part, because we lived in military communities, we didn't have any direct contact with let's just say hippies.
Oh, a lot of it, we saw it on TV. There was, but we felt safe and secure living on the base. But downtown there would be people that were walking and opposing and carrying placards and signs. But I wasn't personally confronted by anyone, but we were quite aware of it.
I can remember my mother telling me stories about how unpopular the war was, and really how society looked down upon his military service and him being active duty. So that was, I didn't bring up something with him, you know, I didn't continue to ask him questions because it seemed like it was a very painful subject, and so I just, out of respect for him, didn't do that.
End of World War II, you have all these men who are all over the world, and they come home, but they come home on a boat. They come home on a Navy ship with other veterans. And so they have this time to, in a sense, engage in group therapy. Not official group therapy, but they're on this ship with other people who have gone through a similar experience. And because it takes some time, by the time they get home, they have in some ways been able to process everything they went through. Not everything, because you do have PTSD. We didn't know that's what it was called, right? But that you do have people who have gone through experiences they're not going to get over right away. But for a lot of the men, they are able to kind of get through that because of the way that they brought them back. Vietnam, it doesn't happen. Vietnam, you know, this is your day, you're in the jungle, and then the next day maybe you're in San Francisco. And now what do I do, right? How do you process that? And how do you go to your family who's thrilled that you're home and somehow relate to what you just went through?
Actually, when you say about talking about it, he avoided the subject, and as a child, if I asked him questions, he just kind of moved on and didn't even mention it.
But he had changed. There were some quiet moments, and I see a lot of it coming out now when he sees a war movie, and you see that, and of course it opened his eyes to what his dad and my father were World War II vets, and he knew what some of the things that they had gone through.
Even those of us that weren't on the front lines, things stick with you.
Of course.
You get to a hot sunny, and I may have mentioned this before, I get to a hot sunny day outside in Texas here, and a helicopter comes by, and the hair on the back of my neck stands up. Because that, to me, that's what it was over there. It was hot and humid, and in fact, it's doing it right now. So those are some of the things that stick with you.
In many ways, it was a horrible war to fight. It's not a good climate. I mean, it's hot. It's incredibly hot. And they're sweating, they're walking, and they're sweating. And so the Pentagon might say, oh, okay, so you just need to walk these 3 miles. Well, for a Marine, 3 miles is nothing, except 3 miles through jungle is very difficult to do.
Korean War and later, like now, with Desert Storm and all of those, they have a lot more money for people coming back with PTSD. Whereas in the Vietnam War, they just assumed that you would be changed somewhat, but there was not a lot of push or encouragement to go for help. And there was a lot of people that were so badly affected.
I can remember him saying a few things where, that he was, had just graduated from college, and so he was like 23 years old, 24 years old, something like that, and he was in charge of a group of men, enlisted men, and he would say things like, oh, well, I knew they weren't coming back, and I knew that was based on decisions I made, and so it's just, that's a lot for a person that age. It's a lot for anybody to take, but there was definitely not military support from psychological impact or response to that. It was just assumed this is your job, and deal with it.
They were called, warmongers, and it was as though the war was their fault. Not like it is now. And the people here are heroes. They were heroes then too.
It was very difficult for them to adjust to, and there was no apparatus. There was nothing in place to help them kind of process what they had gone through, or to kind of deal with the situation. Everyone was kind of not in denial, but they really didn't know what was going on. They didn't understand it. If you go and look at news magazines like Time and Newsweek, all of these things, in January of '73, that's when they're signing the peace accords. Even between '73 and '75, it's gone. All right, the American public doesn't want to talk about it anymore. We're not going to debate it anymore. It's done. And so then what does that do to veterans? Right? What does that do? If people want to forget that this all happened, then your presence is just going to be an issue. And how are we going to, we're just going to have to ignore you, because, which is why veterans really feel like they were completely ignored, because they were.
Now, this is my opinion. I'm not going to play, anything else. It's just that I don't think that the VA is doing enough for the folks. There seems to be more political alignment than there is practical requirements for the military.
I think that, even from a generational time period, that, mental health was not really talked about in as much as it is now, but also that the official military stance on it was not to acknowledge that was, unless somebody's, looks and acts, in an affected way, that possibly they were treating individuals like that, but not assuming that the mass group that was overseas in the military, in the war situation, that clearly there's no way they could not be impacted, that they all had to be impacted.
People like to kind of give lip service to, yes, we have to do things, but they don't want to necessarily pay for what has to happen. We have a lot of guys now, right? Men and women who are coming back with serious injuries that need to be dealt with, and we don't always want to kind of pay attention to that.
Looking back, do you wish that he wasn't in the military? Do you ever wish that, like, y'all could have, like, lived in one stable place? And,
No, I don't think so, except maybe on those days when he was in Vietnam and it was really bad.